All right, so we've gone through the soundboard. Now we're going to talk about the strings. Strings have a lot of tension on them. The reason I said earlier, one of the reasons to check and see if it's been tuned, is that it should be regulated and kept at a fairly stable pitch, and that's what the tunings do. If it hasn't been, first of all, you have a chance of breaking strings when you go to tune it. Secondly, there is a point in which they start breaking. These strings are all original. You can tell a piano where they've had breaking strings, usually, because they'll look different. If you just stare at them and you'll see a bunch of steel and copper strings at the bottom, that's normal. But you'll see one that's bright and shiny and all the rest that are dull. That usually indicates that they've replaced a string. If they've replaced one or two strings, that's a bad sign. Strings are all the same age. They have approximately the same amount of tension on them for their sizes. And if you've replaced one or two, then the other ones are close. So it's kind of like buying a piano on its last legs. You get a couple strings broken, you're going to get a couple more when you go to tune it next time, possibly. Strings. The next is the pin block and the pins. This piece of wood up here is called the pin block. On a lot of pianos, they cover this up with a piece of felt or veneer. You can't see this piece of wood, and it's really not critical that you can see it, but you know that it's there. These pins are 2.5 inches long. They're really fine threaded screws is what they are. They go through a hole in this cast iron plate into the chunk of wood called the pin block. Pin blocks are all very hard woods, made to hold those pins really tightly. Just like the soundboard we were talking about earlier, wood dries out, the pin block dries out. And it can get to the point where eventually it dries out to the point where the pins aren't tight enough anymore. Kind of like if you have a wooden chair at your dining room table and it gets old and it gets wobbly. Sometimes you can tighten the screws up. You have to do something to take up, how much they've dried. When these get bad, when this gets dried out, I'll put my tuning wrench on here to tune it, and I'll pull on the tuning wrench to tighten it, and I let go, and the wrench just spins backward. It can no longer hold the tension of those strings. They can do a couple things to buy you time to get by with a pin block that's going bad. One of which is replacing the pins with larger pins. And depending on how they do it, they could go through and replace, a couple here and there. And kind of like the strings, you'll see a couple shiny pins or a couple pins that are a different color that stand out. They don't look the same as all the rest. So really what you're looking for is uniformity, strings and pins. Something else you can look for in that is to simply play a scale. If the piano has